Let's start talking about what tools we need to use to start soldering jewelry. Of course, one of the most important things we need is a torch. We need an open flame to get things up to the right temperature to make the soldering process occur. And there are a lot of different torches on the market. There's a lot of different choices for how you might impart the heat that we need for soldering. We're going to be using a little handheld butane torch. And I guess I should say that's what I'm going to be using. In nearly all of my courses, with a few exceptions, I'm going to be demonstrating and showing you everything using that little torch. It's economical. They're only about $40 to $80, and they are not intimidating. They're light and easy to use. But they are different from some of the other torches that you might see jewelers using. So I kind of want to start out by explaining how the torch, the little butane torch, is different from a bigger setup that you might find in some jewelry studios. This is a dual gas system that I'm on the floor here. And I just moved this from a different part of my gallery. So it's actually not hooked up right now. I'm not going to start it. I'm not going to turn it on. But I want to explain how this differs from that other smaller torch. So this, like I said, is a dual system torch, or a dual gas torch system. And this one in particular is oxygen and propane. Sometimes we'll call it oxy-propane. There's also oxyacetylene. Acetylene is a very popular jeweler's torch. You could also just get a single torch system using propane only. For instance, this is a single gas system using butane. So there's a lot of different gases that you can use to get the right temperature flame for jewelry soldering. So let's get back to this oxy-propane setup. This is just a typical oxygen tank. It's the same kind of tank that you would use if you had COPD and you needed to take in oxygen. It's an oxygen tank. This is a propane tank. It's like a little mini version of the one I have out on my gas grill. So I have two different gases here, and each of these tanks has on it a regulator. So what this regulator system does is it regulates the pressure of the gases that are coming out at one time. So it keeps it at a steady, regulated pressure that you have control over. The gas then leaves these regulators and they come through hoses here. The hoses ultimately join together and it comes to a tip here. And with these little knobs, I can regulate the ratio between my two gases, if I want an oxygen-rich flame or if I want an oxygen-poor flame, for instance. What's my ratio? How much oxygen versus how much propane? So I have control over that. And then can you see this tiny little tip? Maybe I'll put it up against my black shirt. You see how small that little tip is? You can interchange these tips. So there's a lot of different size tips that you can use, and you can change those out and have control over that. So with this setup, I've got my two gases. I'm regulating the pressure that the gas comes out. I'm keeping in control of the ratio of the two gases, and I have choices on what size tips I'm going to use. Also, this is a very small torch handle. It's almost like using a pen, right? So it's a little bit easier to hang on to and maintain maybe than one of these big ones. This isn't heavy, but it's a different feel. So I wanted to show you that. And in a second, I'll go up to my desk and I'll show you how a butane torch is different from something like this. Now, this setup, without having the gas tanks full, I don't know, anywhere from $300 to $700 for this torch setup. So the difference in economy is huge. And I usually, for beginners, I usually recommend you go ahead and start with a butane torch. And if you really like it and you want to make the investment, you can go to something like this. One other thing I forgot to mention. Gases burn at different temperatures. Butane, what we're going to be using in our little torch, maxes out at about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of the flame. This oxy-propane setup is around 6,500, 6,900 degrees Fahrenheit. So there is a huge difference between the temperature of the flame that comes out of here and the temperature of the flame that comes out of this piece. And that's an important it's an important thing to recognize, especially if you're switching from using a dual system or dual gas system like this one and then going to butane, or if you're used to using butane and you switch to this. It's really important to understand the difference of those temperatures. And again, when I get up there and I start talking about the butane torch, I'll get into that in a little more detail. So let's compare our butane torch to that oxy-propane setup that I just showed you. This is my self-contained torch. I don't have any hoses. I don't have any outside gas or anything like that. My handle is my tank. It gets filled by gas that I buy in a little can like this. So here's my tank. There's no regulator. I don't have anywhere on here to regulate the amount of gas that exits not the amount of gas, the pressure that the gas exits my tool. So I do have a little lever on the right-hand side here with a plus and a minus. That lets more or less gas out. So when you have your torch turned on, it'll go really far if it's on plus, or you pull it back if you bring it back to minus. It's a little plus minus gauge, but it's not really doing anything about the pressure. It's just letting more or less gas out. So the way that these torches work is as your gas goes down in the tank, it loses pressure. If the gas is up high, you have high pressure. If the gas runs out, you're going to have lower pressure. So for instance, if you were going to be turning this all the way up to plus, and you've got this all the way filled up, that flame is going to come out at the highest pressure, the hottest, or the strongest that this tool can do. It's going to come out and it's going to sound like, it's really going to be charging. If you turn it down with full gas, with full pressure, it'll come in a little bit. However, let's say your gas is running out and you have it kind of low in your tank. That means the pressure is going to be low. In that case, if you have this turned all the way up to plus and you turn it on, it's just going to come out like, as opposed to that when the pressure was high. So what I'm trying to do is get you to recognize those temperatures, or the flame, with both your eyes and your ears. If you let your tank get a little bit low, you're kind of thinking, how come it's not working? How come it's not working? It's just not a hot enough flame. There's not enough oomph behind your flame. So if I know I'm going to be working on a project that's going to take a little bit of lengthy soldering, and just in general, it's a good habit to fill your tank up often. You can buy torches that are a little bit bigger. They have a bigger tank, bigger handle, and those last obviously longer, and they have a little bit even more pressure built up in them. However, I find them a little bit big and hard to use, so I kind of like this smaller one. But these are all choices that you can make, and I want you to be as informed as possible about that. So you have your tank and how it relates to the pressure, because we don't have an actual regulator. We need to make sure we keep that full. I already talked about our plus minus button over here. Another thing is we don't have a variation of tips, right? So you saw how little that tip was with my dual gas system. It's a tiny little tip, and you can change it out, with little subtle differences for a big one or a small one. This is gigantic compared to that. And I don't think that's, well, I know in my supplies, I don't have any tip that's this big. So why do we need to have such a huge flame with this torch? This gets back to the temperature of the fuel that I was talking about. Remember, this burns at about 2,500 degrees. The oxypropane burns at about 6,900 degrees. So if I had that teeny tiny little flame with this low temperature fuel, I would not be able to impart enough heat to get my piece up to temperature. And then conversely, if I had this size tip with that $6,900 Fahrenheit oxypropane setup, I would have way too much heat. Like if I did this big flame with 6,900 degrees, I would put it on there and it would just, stuff would happen way too fast and you'd probably melt things more often. So you've got this big flame because it's a cooler torch. It's a cooler temperature. And there you have a little flame because it is a hotter temperature. A quick word for those of you that are transitioning between a butane torch and a dual gas system. And by the way, I've been talking about my oxypropane system that's 6,900 degrees. If you get into oxyacetylene, that's even hotter. So this is definitely the low end of the range. So if you're transitioning between these two torches, let's say you were using a dual gas system in a workshop, but you moved and now you want to set up your own thing at home, whatever the reason. If you're switching from a hotter gas to a butane torch, or if you've been using this and you want to switch to the hotter torch, it's going to take a little bit of adjustment on how you're using it. So, for instance, the people that have been using the hotter torch move their hands very quickly. When you use a hot torch, it's a smaller flame, it's a little bit more pinpointed, but it is nearly 3 times as hot. Not quite, but nearly 3 times as hot. So even though your flame is smaller, you still have to move around and keep your hand going and just kind of keep everything warm. If you land for too long in one spot, it's a lot of heat to be putting onto your metal. Whereas with the butane torch, you have to be a little bit more deliberate, a little bit slower. You have to kind of let it get up to temperature. So for the people moving from the hot fuel to the low temperature fuel, you have to get into a new habit where you're not moving around a whole lot doing all this, because then nothing ever gets hot because you're moving off of it too often. And for those of you that are moving from this to the hotter flame, if you've been used to going very slow and working things and doing your stuff in kind of a more leisurely pace, you're going to have to quicken up your hand motion because you don't want to stay so slow in one place and burn up your piece. So I feel like that's an important thing, just in case I'm reaching someone who is transitioning in either direction from these two different kinds of torch systems. Again, we're going to be using this one in all of the courses that I show you.